Welcome to Backyard Oasis, a podcast designed by and for older adults living in the beautiful Pioneer Valley of Western Massachusetts and produced in the tech studios at Greenfield Community College in Greenfield, Massachusetts.
All right, it's been a while since I've been in the studio. Back again, though, and today I think we have something that's going to be really exciting. At least I'm very pleased to have a guy who's almost into everything. This is Josh Shanley. He grew up in New York City, but is called Northampton, his adopted hometown for nearly 3 decades. He served for 25 years as a firefighter emergency management leader in both Amherst and Northampton, and today continues working in public safety across Massachusetts. In recent years, he's turned his attention to the region's history, from the 1936 Connecticut flood to Cold War bunkers hidden in plain sight, exploring how the Valley's past disasters still shape the infrastructure and preparedness decisions we live with today. And, you know, that's why I've invited him. I have a little interest in these things, and that's the title for today, Resilience Centers. I've had a little experience with the concept, and it piqued my curiosity, and actually tried to have some action on it. But we'll get into all that later. Really to pull out and get a large picture of what this is all about, I thought I'd stumble and fumble, as usual, with what I think is a definition, and have Josh help out a little bit more. As you can tell from the bio, he's pretty involved in the field. So I thought I'd start with a definition. What the heck is a resilience center? We can tell a little bit from what the word is. We want to have a resilient society. We want to survive. There's some changes that have been happening during our lifetime in big numbers. People talk about the climate change. I call it the climate emergency. At any rate, my kind of concept of what this is that we have sites that we can go to, whether it be elderly and disabled, homeless, whatever it might be. Some are for general citizenship. But as a overview look at it, resilience centers is what I see as a place for us to go in floods and fires and in huge snowstorms that break down roofs and that sort of thing. So help me a little bit with the whole field of endeavor around resilience centers, if you can, Josh. What can you tell us?
Sure, Chad. So the term resilience center is relatively new. My area of study is on Massachusetts, specifically in Northampton and Amherst specifically, really dialed in.
Great.
To the best of my knowledge, the only work that's been done towards an actual resilience center, and I could be wrong, I've since retired from Amherst and Northampton, but early on, probably going back about 15 years, I was involved in a project that included developing resiliency in the city of Northampton.
How early was that?
This would have been around 2000. Well, I started in Northampton around 2009 after transferring from Amherst. So it would have been around 2010 that I got involved in a committee that was focused on building resiliency in the city of Northampton. And what that meant was a resiliency hub, which was essentially a shelter the way you're describing it, but then further building out redundant infrastructure that connected energy and communications between public safety, gas stations, grocery stores, banking, and shelters.
As a sort of maybe typical citizen, what does that look like? I'm thinking systemically of all, back to the old armories of the duck and cover and Cold War and nuclear shelters and all that. They were not able to stop bombs for sure, but they were places where folks could go that was stocked with water. It had its own generator for power. There might be a kitchen, stored food and water. So when you talk about what you are, but yet you said there was systems built outside, is this hardening the LP gas lines and electric lines or something to the center, or can you say more about that?
Sure. So you're covering a lot of area over a wide swath of time. So just to fall back into the Cold War notion of shelters, there were two types of shelters, basically. Fallout shelters, which were designed to protect the general public from radiation after a blast. And those were very common. In the late 60s, there were probably more than 6,000 licensed, and I'll use the air quotes, licensed fallout shelters in Massachusetts alone.
For individual homes, or are you again talking for the population?
For the general population.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And what that actually looked like was somewhat debatable. We all grew up seeing those familiar yellow and black signs indicating a fallout shelter. And what that meant in practical purposes, what is any basement, any shelter below grade, public buildings like churches and schools, but also people tended to, around 1963, 1964, around the Cuban Missile Crisis, they were building these things. People were building them in their basements. So to call them fallout shelters after a blast, they were designed to protect people from radiation, not to be confused with a bomb shelter, which would protect people from an actual detonation. So that's kind of the fallout shelter. And I agree that there is today, a parallel that you could draw. To get back to the resiliency centers, though, in Northampton specifically, I can speak from experience because I was involved in the development of that, or the planning for it anyway. That was redundant infrastructure built around a microgrid. Now, I'm not an engineer, but we had engineers on the committee. So we had redundant electrical infrastructure using solar panels, and they were designed to provide electricity to dedicated critical infrastructure. Again, a shelter, the police station, the fire station, grocery store, banks, it's a city hall, basic needs in the city in the event of a sustained, prolonged weather event or some sort of disaster that took the primary electricity offline. So that was the first notion of a resiliency hub in Northampton anyway.
Okay, that's a little different than I was thinking of. Center. See, you're helping me because you're giving me operational definitions to these vague concepts that I have, and it's I really appreciate you helping it be more precise, deepens understanding. Don't let me interrupt.
So, to fast forward, though, I think your understanding and the definition that you are more familiar with is today's version. It's evolved, and again, nothing I say is secret. Everything's been. The Gazette does a really good job at publishing and tracking these things. And currently in Northampton, the plan has evolved to identify the Baptist Church, the old Baptist Church near the Forbes Library, if anyone's familiar with Northampton, that was going to be designated as the resiliency hub. Now, that's very different from when I was involved in the process. Okay. That whole plan, from what I understand, again, reading the Gazette and just keeping up with publicly available knowledge, it's essentially stalled for a variety of reasons. So I don't think there are any plans at this point to move that ahead. If there are, I'm certainly not privy to them. But the idea changed to probably fit more of what you are thinking about, where open on a regular basis to provide support to anyone in town, homeless people, whatever else you needed to on a regular basis. And then my understanding is that during a disaster, it could shift to provide sheltering support. Now, it's if that's the case, and I understand it to be, it's not exactly a perfect model because the building itself doesn't really support the needs. Currently in Northampton, one of the schools is designated as the emergency shelter, and that's pretty common. In most communities, schools are identified to serve as emergency shelters.
Okay, so I'm getting two different concepts. One is the hub, and that could be on a mini grid, electric grid, if you want to call it that, solar. And then there's the centers, which are more individual building based and so on. Do you know of any practicing models of either one of those two somewhere in the world or country? Certainly not in this area. Your expertise is, Connecticut River Valley. It's a big area. Any there, or has anybody rolled out one of the two models that we've discussed?
No, not to the best of my knowledge. Like a
Okay.
microgrid supporting a resiliency hub, redundant critical infrastructure supported by solar.
That's the key, redundant, the costs. Yeah.
It's not the cost, although it would add expense, but it is in emergency management. We want to provide redundancy without duplication, if that makes sense. And it's somewhat, when things go offline, we want to have a system in place that's going to fill that need. So there does need to be a backup system. At where I live, at my house, we have regular power, and then we have a generator. The generator tests itself once a week, but we don't rely on it until the power goes out. And in 2011, we were without power for 8 days. So that generator ran for 8 days. It's not important until you need it, and then it becomes essential. So that's what I mean by redundancy without duplication.
Well, what the without duplication in that case is that the same wires in your house run from either the generator or, let's call it, the grid.
Sure.
So that the added expense isn't huge because it's just the generator.
Sure.
And of course the switching apparatus and so on. Okay. These weather events are happening more often. They're getting bigger. They're getting more extreme. How can the population set up something for the unexpected? Because these things are unexpected. What's the triple P? Pre-planning prevents poor, whatever is poor. Yeah. So what can be done in a town as a beginning steps, let's say, to prepare for the unexpected? What can we do to protect our elderly, our disabled, the most vulnerable people? I don't know if you want to go to Section 8 residents, etc. Sometimes the events are sequestered. During the heavy floods, we had an area in Amherst, I guess I would call it West Amherst, that was really bad, but, East Amherst, South and North Amherst, Pomeroy Village, whatever, all those areas were doing okay. What could we have that, the tornado only goes through, South Amherst? What could we have to take care of one another?
Well, there's a lot that has to happen.
What's already there, is that enough, do you think? Or
Well, we need to approach it holistically. So individuals, families need to take some level of responsibility. And what the American Red Cross model is have a kit, have it planned, be informed. So I think it's an individual and family's level of responsibility to have those things.
the go bag?
Go bag, sure.
We did a podcast on that.
Yeah. So to have a go bag And, that involves, we could have a whole conversation on what's in the go bag, prescription medications, specific foods, whatever it is you need personally that can't be easily obtained. So at that level, that's kind of a personal and
individual and family.
Yeah.
Then we grow up a notch.
Yeah.
From there.
At the community level, at the municipality level, and this is the work I did when I was working in Amherst and Northampton. There's a lot that goes on a regular basis, on an ongoing basis. That is, what we call like a blue sky day. So we do a lot of planning and preparation. We do exercises and training that looks at the community as a whole. For the most part, from an emergency management perspective, you can identify where the most likely places are. If we stick with flooding, for example, because that's going to be one of our top 3 hazards. As you mentioned, it's easy to look back and say, all right, when we have a flooding event, when we have a major precipitation event, these are the areas in town that are most likely to flood. And then at a municipal level, there are mitigation measures, there are prevention measures that can be done to offset that damage. It can be infrastructure, they can build additional drainage, but also they can inform people that you are in a low-lying area, for example, and you need to pay particular attention and have a plan that when you get a call, in many cases nowadays it's like some sort of reverse 911, you need to be able to exit, you need to be able to evacuate, and here's where you're going to go. Right. So be informed on that and be ready to go. If you're living in an area that's particularly vulnerable, that's part of the responsibility, the contract that you're engaging with. So that's at the individual and the family, and then at the municipal level specific to flooding.
So here's my concern. Some of these measures, maybe all of them, require money. The money goes through a political process. How much citizen input in certain towns we can say is very little. Others, pet projects at the city level and so on. My concern is we're not spending money on that enhanced groundwater, mitigation. And so it goes back to my thought of at least we have a backstop of a specific resilience center type idea. It's a concern some of us have about, what can be done in a, I'm sorry to say, sort of last second great need situation, because those decisions aren't being made. The results aren't happening. You've said that there's not much, if any, of the hub style solutions, or not solutions, but aids to the public, and there's not much of the centers either. To me, Northampton might be a little ahead of the ball, because I call it practicing. They're practicing with the church. They've got the social aspects lined up, which are so much more easy in most cases than appropriating funds and doing, hardscapes and things like that. But they have 3 or 4 different, social aid organizations involved, like CSO, which is counseling, like Man a Kitchen, which is actually the cooks. They have the community, they call it CSAC in Amherst. You know what I'm talking about, the result to the George Floyd murders. The
community safety,
yeah.
Community response teams, non-police.
Right.
Yes.
That's involved. So they have again, I call it a practice. They're practicing. They have what's, low-hanging fruit, like the personnel from social service agencies in line. I guess they're practicing a little bit with the building, which is, the built environment, which is the hard part. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of focus on this issue. Maybe I brought up a hot topic. I don't know.
No, well, sure, you brought up a hot topic, but I think you're conflating a lot of the hot topics into one, and they don't necessarily complement one another the way that the general public might think. So yeah, all of those assets are in place in Northampton and to some degree in Amherst. Just to be clear, to the best of my knowledge and according to what I read in the Gazette, the church is at a stall, so that is not as if it's up and running.
Oh, they're not practicing anymore?
Well, yeah. Again, it's just reached. It's run into politics and economics, and those are just real world realities that we have to face whenever we're doing any of these sorts of plans. So, not to say that there's no practice going on, but to say that all of those assets that you identified are aligned to support emergency response or disaster response, these kinds of floods and other events, weather-related infrastructure failures. Sure, they'll be there, but do they line up specifically? Are they purposed for that? I think the answer is no. And again, not to misrepresent myself, I'm no longer affiliated, but I do stay informed. So those are there, yes. Are they specifically designed to support people and the community during a disaster? Not specifically, but they will stand up. I'm sure that they would.
Okay. All right. So, Chicken Little, the sky is falling. That's sort of the direction I'm headed in. You think we're well in shape for, what went through Springfield a few years ago, the hurricane,
2011 tornado.
Yeah.
2011, we had 4 federally declared disasters.
So there's some things that you can't be prepared for no matter how hard you work. We are, as a culture, ready for the things that are happening with the climate change.
Are you posing that as a question to me? Are we ready?
Do you think we are? I mean,
I think on a day-to-day basis, yeah. Every community in Massachusetts has a comprehensive emergency management plan. Mm-hmm. There is an emergency management director for each of the 351 cities and towns. Each of them handle things, specifically to them. Everyone does it a little bit differently. There is a large network of support that goes into it. I think what you're getting at is, these events like we saw in 2023, these storm events that kind of pop up, unannounced, unnamed storms, and they are very isolated. Are they related to climate change? One might argue that. I would say that we don't have enough data. I'm not skeptical, but we just don't have enough data to sort of to look forward on these. I recognize that we're having changes in our weather patterns, and what that's resulting in are these hyper-local events that pop up suddenly, and they are high precipitation events, multiple inches of rain in a very short period of time. And what that's showing us is that the current infrastructure specific to flooding isn't set up to mitigate those hazards. I'm also concerned, and I wrote an article in the Republican about 2 weeks ago on this, the infrastructure that was built for flooding in this area, a large part of it came in the aftermath of the 1936 flood, beginning around 1938 because of the hurricane, and then going up into the 40s, essentially coming to an end at the beginning of World War II. That infrastructure was built by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and by contract was handed over to each respective community. That was the deal. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers comes in, builds this infrastructure, and then says, here it is, and then they exited. So most of it largely, and I've spent quite a bit of time visiting these places and studying them, frankly, with engineers and others, public safety officials, looking at the various states of repair of the flooding infrastructure specifically. A lot of it was built and then not maintained. So levees, pumps,
Right. Hadley is
dams,
going
et
through
cetera.
that with the Connecticut River. I don't know what you call that wall, but
The levee, yeah.
levee.
Yep.
A lot of this discussion somehow we've centered around the water hazards. Reminds me of watershed maps, and some of the Corps' work was working with that to. I used to work in Westfield, and there's marks 30 feet off the ground on the buildings where the water went through there. So.
Sure.
Some of what they've done is to try to prevent that sort of thing from happening. How does, we're talking systems instead of isolated pieces. How does things like the effort to return fish to the area, there's different kinds of shad, et cetera, that I forget the autonomous fish. I forget what they name them, but there's eels and so on. There's let's call them fish that come from the ocean and come into our area and spawn, breed, however you want to call that, and then they go out to sea. Some people have advocated for the little dams around and about, and I know mostly the eastern hill towns, so Leverett, Shutesbury, Wendell, to remove those so that those stocks can get back there. The populations are decimated. Do they coordinate with these other, I guess I'm going to call emergency management types of ideas? Is that in unison at all, or?
Sure. Again, you've poured a lot on the table to unpack there. Let me give it a shot. So in Massachusetts, there are more than 3,000 dams. A majority of those are, to the best of my recollection, are privately owned, and they're small, they're older. Many of the problematic dams that you're referring to date back before around 1900, Industrial Revolution era. And I'm not a dam mitigation expert, but in general, the consensus is that, to your point, yes, it would be nice to remove them, but what that does, at the risk of oversimplifying it, is it creates a second set of hazards. Upstream of those dams, in many cases, contaminants have settled. So removing the dam is going to allow the contaminants to move downstream, which creates a whole very complicated, expensive set of problems. So when dams are removed, as they are, it involves removal of the sediment upstream of the dam.
Oh my goodness.
So that becomes an issue.
Sure.
In addition, if you look at a number of dams that are particularly fragile, they're in precarious condition, and if they gave way downstream, would lead to all sorts of hazards due to populations or infrastructure. There's a short list of those dams. All of this is available through U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and Massachusetts DCR. So there's no mystery here in terms of where these dams are. So that's on the dam side that you addressed. But I think to your earlier point, there is a movement, a trend to get back to, in emergency management circles, we refer to as nature-based solutions. So much of the flooding infrastructure that was built after 1936 involves levees, concrete, rebar, pumps, etc. And it involves channeling, containing the water, and directing it. That was the approach at the time. What we're getting back to now is starting to look into the early agricultural age of Massachusetts and working and living with the river. So when the river rises, we move back. When the river recedes, we can move in. And that's the agricultural approach. And that's the nature-based solution. So 2011, you mentioned, we had not only the tornado, we had a big snowstorm out east early on. We had Snowtober or Snowpocalypse.
Yep.
We also had Irene.
My father was here from Florida at that time. He's got on a thin little jacket. His blood had thinned from moving to Florida 10 years before that. Yeah, I'm sorry. I just got that image. Go ahead.
So we had Irene also, Tropical Storm Irene, that really tested the infrastructure around here. And to a large degree, again, it held, but in many cases, it was a test of the infrastructure. The Chickley River up in Hawley, Mass, along Route 8, was decimated. And in the aftermath of that, again, very publicly through the paper, the recorder in that case, followed the recovery efforts of the Chickley River, and it was not done well.
We got state money, but not federal, correct?
No, what I'm referring to is that in the aftermath, the delay, there was a response, a delay in the response, and local officials decided to pour riprap, large stone, and 6 months later, they had to, more or less, they had to go and remove that riprap, which turned into another more expensive problem. Yeah. The idea of pouring riprap and pouring concrete with rebar and, building Army Corps of Engineer 1938, 1940 era flood infrastructure has more or less gone by. And what's currently being considered is more of what's going on in Europe, where they're zoning areas that are going to be dedicated to flooding, recognizing that it doesn't happen often, but when flooding does occur, this area needs to be set aside as a retention pond. Certain areas along the bank need to be replanted with specific types of forestry, etc. So there's this softening of the riverbank.
Well, it's more sustainable.
It's a sustainable approach.
Less costly.
I don't know about less costly, but more sustainable.
Well, it's got to be less costly than bringing in a bunch of cement and rebar and heavy equipment and so on. But at any rate, that's some real good news. That's some real good news.
It's complicated because there are issues, and again, my area of focus currently is on Northampton and Hadley. Looking at the levee in in Hadley, it was built in the aftermath of the 1927 flood, and largely left alone. There is a large curve in the river at that point, and then it curves back. And then it goes a little further south, and then it curved again and back again. And that was where the Oxbow formed spontaneously in a spring freshet in 1841. My concern on
that's closed now. It's not part of the river anymore. What
it bypasses. And it was a spring freshet. My concern, and I have talked with public officials about this, is that area in Hadley, commonly locally known as the honeypot, right? So the river comes south, and then it makes that curve to the west, essentially 90 degrees in a curve, and that's where the levee starts. It's a simple riprap levee, not a concrete levee.
Right.
And then it makes the curve around. So the condition of the infrastructure at that first curve is antiquated, and there are a variety of problems with that infrastructure. The secondary issue is at the tip, where it began to erode in 2008. There was a large maintenance project that went on, and then suddenly it went on for months, and in 2009 there was concern that it was going to fail. And I've talked with fluvial geomorphologists who tell me that if an area like that, towards the honeypot area, begin to fail, it's really difficult to predict where it stops. So it's not to say that it's really unpredictable. So that's the other area. that's really of concern in Hadley. And then the third area in Hadley that's complicated is that the rail trail now is essentially operating as a backup levee system, but that's problematic because of jurisdictional issues and maintenance, and but that's another issue that needs to be maintained.
Oh, right. Okay, I see what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Behind the malls,
Yep.
etc.
Exactly.
Okay.
Along Route 9, yeah. All along Russell Street there, if you follow that. On the Northampton side, it's a very different set of infrastructures. There's a levee, but then there's a pumping station at Hockenham Road that
Is
has...
that near the airport?
Yeah, in that area, sure, down that end of town. And you can see it on 91 if you're traveling south and look to your right. There are 3 pumps in that building that were installed in the aftermath of the 1936 flood.
Wow.
They are 1940 tugboat engines that were repurposed and still to this day serve as the primary line of flood protection infrastructure in Northampton.
Detroit diesels.
2 diesels and
Probably.
a gas, I want to say.
Oh, okay.
I think it's 2 diesels and a gas.
Anyway.
In 2023, when we had one of these pop-up storms that really impacted Leominster and Williamsburg, among other communities, Northampton was also impacted by this. And that flood infrastructure, 2 of those pumps came offline, and the third pump nearly came offline. It lost a fuel pump. So it was very close to failure. Again, I'm not telling anything out of school. This was all documented in the Gazette. I do pay attention to these issues. I stay in touch with the people who manage them. To the best of my knowledge, the issue was repaired, but it remains a vulnerability and is a very expensive problem to fix permanently, in excess of $1 million, just to deal with that electricity and fuel issue. So that remains a big concern in terms of flooding infrastructure on the Northampton side. So when I talk to the public about these, I sort of paint it as a tale of 2 cities, if you will. Different set of problems, very expensive solutions.
Is there federal aid to help with that, do you think? I mean, the city can't do it all by themselves.
There again, I don't want to get out of my lane too far, but there are legislative efforts underway that could potentially address not all of these, that could start to get a handle on some of these issues. Again, these are very expensive problems, and what I'm talking about is just one pin on the map. There are other places around Massachusetts that have similar issues. One of the things that complicates flood mitigation infrastructure is that there is no cookie cutter solution. Every place has a different set of problems, so we can't come up with a template. For example, in the aftermath of the 1936 flood, in New Hampshire in particular, they came up with the design for these wrought iron bridges. We drive over them all the time. A company in Berlin, Connecticut, designed them and built them, and it was a template. And what they did was, there were real life erector sets, and they could largely spec them out, send them, and then dial them in based on need. That was a good measure. And if you look at some of those bridges, they were put in around 1938. And they've since expired. I have one right down the street from where I live, and we our community spent about 6 months taking that bridge down and putting up a more modern structure. Expensive, time-consuming. So the infrastructure that was built in the aftermath of the 36 flood, the 38 hurricane, have largely exceeded their lifespan, yeah. So I know I put a lot out there. To get back to your question around funding, possibly, but it starts to get expensive, and then it gets political, and that's where I sort of draw the line. I spend a lot of time talking about government without talking about politics.
Well, it's all along the same lines. You're giving me the backstory that I wasn't aware of. Trying to focus on one thing and seeing all the other problems. But this show will go out, goes out in the general area. It informs the local community. If there's not the political will there, possibly there'll be the citizens' advocacy that follows up. But I think we've covered a lot of ground. One thing I notice about this podcast is I know now why I invited you. It's fascinating, opened our awareness, helped us to be better citizens, to think about these things, to see if we can talk to our neighbors about them, to form coalitions to make things happen for us in our own communities. So thanks a lot, Josh. We're going to wrap it up now and hope that you keep listening to our Backyard Oasis. Take care. See you next time.
This concludes today's podcast. We're always looking for new ideas, so feel free to reach out to Judy Raper, Associate Dean of Community Engagement at Greenfield Community College, at 413-775-1819 if you have an idea you'd love to share. Special thanks to the creators of Backyard Oasis, Denise Schwartz, Chad Fuller, Dennis Lee, and Christine Copeland. Have a great day.